following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
My baby dolls, Happy New Year. Welcome back to another episode of Genesis. I've been on hiatus since December 8th. It's great to be back. We got a whole new ball game in the words of Marvin Miller, because I've been doing a lot of research on him. As always, I am your host, Ian Kahanowitz. We're starting the new year off right. We're bringing back Tim Wendell. We're talking about the 1993 baseball seasons. And if you don't know about Tim Wendell, he wrote a fantastic book, Summer of '68. He also wrote about the 1991 season, one of the best World Series ever. And I advise you both to pick up his books regarding that. And he also wrote about the United States hockey team, which we'll be getting Tim back on in a week before the 2018 Olympics are to begin. And we're going to talk about 1980 U.S. hockey gold. And yesterday, if you read, well, you don't even have to read the papers. I got my smartphone that's smarter than me. CNN Sports brought up that the Vegas hotline now predicts the United States to win the gold medal. I don't know. Last time I saw it, I was 9 years old. In '84, I thought Pat LaFontaine would be the Holy Grail. They weren't. They finished 7th. 2002, I thought they would do it. They didn't. Not even on home ice in Salt Lake City. And, of course, in 2010, when my kids were 2, and I remember this because I was telling my kids the other day, who are now 10, I said the last time I remember the United States going for gold was 2010. I barely had any sleep because you kids were crying and you were toddlers, and I had to give you a bath. And my wife was screaming at me at the time, and the damn thing goes into overtime. So I'm literally leaving 2 toddlers in a tub trying to turn the TV up loud so I could hear it in the other room, and of course, the United States lost to Canada. So I'm really excited, especially now that my kids are old enough to understand Olympic hockey and they watch all these YouTube videos and they love the podiums and all this other stuff. So we're going to bring Tim on. We're going to talk a little hockey regarding that. He also wrote a book, My Man Stan, which is about Stan Mikita, which my kids have been reading. And, I love that stuff. So besides being a baseball fan, Tim's a great he's a great hockey fan. And as always, we are so happy to have him. Of course, you are listening to the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network with the Zigzag Man, Ralph Tycho. The whole network is just growing. We got Nancy Finley talking about the owner's perspective out in Oakland. We hear about Charles Finley and our father Carl Finley. And that's a good first-hand knowledge because, again, Nancy is pro-management, so we get a different perspective. Even if you don't agree with it, and we all know Charlie Finley was an a-hole, you get the inside deal, which is what no one else knows. So that's pretty good. We got Peter Golenbach continuing on in Golenbach University. We got Hal Bach on Vintage Sports. Guy's been to 40 World Series. He's been to about 35 Super Bowls. He's covered them all. He's covered it for the Associated Press. The guy's 79. He's still alive and kicking. I do a show with Al Blumkin, Sabre historian extraordinaire, and Dave Nemec on Dave Nemec's old-time baseball and trivia. And, of course, Dave has written a lot of popular books back in the 70s and 80s, and we go back, way back, doing all our stuff. Now we're working on pretty much what goes on in labor and what the players were doing and how the rules have changed over the years. And it's a very interesting study. We're going very slow, but I ask you to tune in on that because these guys, look, they're almost twice my age, but hey, they've been around longer than I have. And one of the discussions I'm going to have with Tim today is the difference between 68 and 93, because there's a lot of parallels there, but we're going to hold off from that. And without any ado, welcome to the show, Tim.
Hey, Happy New Year, Ian. Great to be back with you.
It's always good to have you on the show. It's like, one of these days I'm just going to say, screw it, just co-host stuff, and maybe we'll bring the show to where it usually doesn't go.
We have some fun, no doubt.
That good. Because you're that good, and, not only you are a good guest, but you're a wealth of knowledge. Now, like I promised you before, you have a new book coming out. I want you to talk about it because it's something that affects all of us.
Yeah, very much so. Thanks, Ian. The new book is a little bit of a departure. It's called Cancer Crossings, A Brother, His Doctors, and the Quest to Cure Childhood Leukemia. And this will be out pretty soon. Actually, it'll be bookstores by March. And I think some of the statistics I find mind-boggling. 1 in every 4 families are going to be impacted by cancer. And really what this story is about is kind of twofold. Number one, you see kind of the cancer experience through one family's viewpoint, my own. Growing up, I had a brother, Eric, with leukemia. But from a sports perspective, too, I'm focusing on the 4 to 5 to 6 doctors, the half dozen doctors who turned the tide against childhood leukemia. We're talking mid-60s and the mid-70s. And, Ian, they took it from a disease that had pretty much a death sentence. It was 10% survival rate. To today, it's more than 90%. And these guys were incredible. I mean, I've covered some great teams over the years, and we'll get into some of those here today, talking about 1993 and the Blue Jays. But this team of doctors was as close-knit and as resilient and as tough as any team I've ever been across. And what people kind of forget is in the 60s and into the 70s, leukemia was supposed to be, you're just supposed to make the patient comfortable and pretty much let them die. And these guys decided to do something else. And they were at times criticized, ostracized by the medical community, but they did it. And hanging with these guys and doing Cancer Crossings was just amazing experience. Just their viewpoint upon the world and how resilient they are in something as difficult as this disease.
And that's something that's a great analogy that you draw between a team of doctors and a team on the baseball field. Let me ask you this question: for the publishing company that has decided to publish your book, did you go with ones that published your books previously, or this was a new company that picked up your book?
No, it's a little bit of a new venture, Ian. I went with Cornell Press, and I haven't done a lot of things with university presses, but I really wanted an editor and editors who really believed in this book, who got it. And the guy I ended up going with was the guy who now is heading up Cornell Press. In fact, he just put out a great book about the great Cornell hockey teams with Ken Dryden and all that. A guy named Dean John Smith, who's from Baltimore, huge basketball fan, but he got this book. And he really pushed me at times saying, you got to go back and talk to this doctor again. Or, what were you thinking when my brother died? I was 17. What was going through your mind? And some of the questions that were posed were kind of tough. I mean, I've got 2 kids, and early on, one of the questions that Dean and some other top editors posed was, how did this influence you as a parent? And you're going, whoa, yeah, of course it did. Now I've got to figure that out and ferret that out on my end and make it part of the story. So there was a lot of revision. I knew that it was going to be with this. This is maybe the toughest book I've had to write because it was so personal. But I learned a lot. I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about the medical community. I learned a lot about just the type of mindset you need to have if you're doing something this difficult, if you've decided you're going to try to make leukemia, of all things, into a survivable disease, and how some of that can translate over in other parts of life. So it was tough. I don't think my next book will be a medical book. I think we'll go back to a straight sports book. But I learned a lot, and as they say, Ian, it was worth the price of admission.
Now, let me ask you, did you actually go to Cornell? Because it's all the way up in Ithaca, New York, right by the lake over there.
No, I didn't. Well, I went to Ithaca several times for meetings in the course of doing the book, but I know that part of the world because I went to Syracuse undergrad. So cold winters, a lot of snow. I know that. My relatives tease me now that I kind of wussed out. I can't take that weather anymore. But it's a great part of the world, and I would kind of recommend. I don't know if I would recommend somebody go visit it maybe in the winter, but certainly in the summers, the Finger Lakes, all that. It's just,
yeah.
It's just great. In fact, I didn't talk with him a great deal, but Dick Schaap had a place up in Ithaca, and he absolutely loved it up there, and deservedly so. It was just a great, great part of the world.
It is. I went up there in 92 to 93 to Finger Lakes. They're the deepest lakes. They're the deepest lakes in the world. I don't know if many people know that, the Finger Lake regions, but it also has one of the best vineyards in the northeast of the United States.
Well, it's funny. I was watching the hockey game last night, the Caps and the Carolina Hurricane. Ovechkin wins it in overtime. And at one point, I'm just, they've got advertisements on the boards now, which I kind of go back and forth about. And there's an advertisement for Bully Hill wine. And I'm going, man, that's up in the Finger Lakes. What are they doing advertising down in Raleigh? But obviously, things have opened up for them. So it's a very interesting part of the world.
Oh, it definitely is. And Syracuse is not far from Cornell, maybe about an hour, I would say, down Route 11, I think, if I'm not mistaken. I try to remember because I love that part of the world. I came from New York City when I went up there and saw there was no lights on the roads at night and everyone's making a bonfire and drinking. And I just thought, hey, I'm going to live here, so I went the other way east. 1993, you wrote the book, Summer of '68. A lot of traditionalists, especially the older guys I talked to, in the 30s and 40s, they kind of block out 1969 like it never occurred because the rules were changing. You used to have to win the American League. You used to have to win the National League. There was no championship series. Now in 69 to 93, it's the last year of a championship league series with two divisions in each league. Now we're getting prepared. We're having realignment here going on for 94, but also we have labor issues. Marvin Miller, back in 68 to 69, they avoided a strike over the pension deal. Here in 94, we're going to get our first taste of three divisions in each conference with a wild card. What's the parallel between 68 and 93?
Well, as you say, the parallels are both on and off the field. We have, in a sense, it's funny, I called up the old divisions for 1993, so we've got two divisions in each league. And, man, there's some great races here. This NL West, the Atlanta Braves win with a record of 104 to 58, 104 wins, 58 losses, and narrowly beat the San Francisco Giants by one game. So the Giants don't even make, in a sense, the playoffs. Dusty Baker's manager of the year. And things are going pretty well. You've got some very dynamic teams. The Blue Jays, which I know we'll touch on here in a little bit. Philadelphia Phillies upset the Braves and make it into the World Series. You've got an incredible new crop of stars coming on. Barry Bonds has now landed in San Francisco and coming into his own. Albert Bell has 129 RBIs for Cleveland. This is when Albert was, pulling things together and kind of a good citizen. And Frank Thomas beats him out as the MVP of the league. All these new stars coming up. Yet I covered this year. Baseball Weekly was in its third season at that point in time, and I was the labor guy. So I ended up going to a lot of the meetings. In fact, I was at the one where they announced that in 94 they're now going to go to three divisions in each league, which took everybody by surprise. I almost didn't go to that meeting because everybody was saying nothing's going to happen. But the level of antagonism or mistrust between the players and the owners was profound. And it seemed like it was just a runaway train. Nothing could stop this. And on the owner's side, you had Bud Selig, assuming that you're coming in being the commissioner. I think the power behind the throne was Jerry Reinsdorf, the White Sox owner. You had a real belief among the majority of the owners that, in essence, the players had gotten too rich, had gotten too powerful, and it was time to knock them down a peg. And as we, see what plays out in 99, that was just so ridiculous for the game and such. And on the players' side, it was you had a very strong leadership with Don Fear and his cohorts with the Players Union. They took, that you heard it now bubbling up even within clubhouses, the union. And you think, we were just talking 68 and Marvin Miller. The union, and players would say this. They would say this to guys like me. The union's so strong, we've never lost now. And you're going, oh no, this is a recipe for disaster. So you've got the owners, in a sense, looking to kind of bust the players, and you've got the players taking pride almost in this labor winning streak that's extended pretty much since 68, 67, 68, when Miller kind of took them into arguably the most powerful, certainly the most close-knit union in U.S. industry. And, and they're rising in power and in solidarity, as you see in the UAW, certainly steel workers, et cetera, certainly more 9-to-5 jobs, automakers lose clout, lose power. And looking back on it now from, quarter century away, whatever, it seemed like it was bound to happen. It was like they were both itching for a fight, and they got it, and they got a lot more than they bargained for, because it was almost like I think both sides thought the other side would cave relatively quickly, and both of them had to kind of prove to themselves, to prove to their brethren, their peers, no, we're not caving this time. And it was a recipe for disaster, as you well know.
Now, let's step back a little bit, because I love talking about this labor stuff. And, since you covered labor and you look at it in 68 and, you've been there, covering it in the early 90s. Let's step back a little bit. Let's go back to 1985. We got Peter Uberoff at the Winter Meetings. And, in fact, if you read the new Sabre book that came out, the Winter Meetings Part 2, it's been really the first time that the collusion 1, 2, and 3 cases have a whole chapter dedicated, not to mention the law review articles I've seen, but the distrust of the management really started, I'd say, after the 81 strike, when all the owners colluded together into what Marvin Miller, if you've ever seen Baseball by Ken Burns, and he even puts it in his autobiography, the greatest scandal in baseball history, more so than the Black Sox in 1919, because there you only had 8 people colluding. Here you had all 26 teams, all 26 owners, their henchmen, their scouts, everything. They tried to destroy free agency. And if you look at the statistics from 85 to 88, Jack Morris, his career should have been into the Hall of Fame long before this year, but he didn't get a chance to go to the Yankees because why? They slapped actually Reisendorf slapped Steinbrenner's hand for even offering him something. Reigns, Dawson had to play on a $500,000 contract because he just wanted out of Montreal, and he went to the Cubs, and he said, hey, write me a blank check and I'll come. The owners screwed the players. $280 million was awarded to him in 1990. That the repercussions actually took place in 92 and 93 with Fay Vincent getting the sack and one of the leaders of collusion becoming commissioner in Bud Selig. But I'll tell you something else that came out of the collusion cases: the Florida Marlins and the Colorado Rockies.
Very much so. I mean, here's the first seasons for those two teams, and they're kind of rising out of it. And it's interesting how the Marlins will have success relatively soon. Winning, I believe, in '97, and then the Rockies have been kind of up and down. With dealing with the altitude problem, etc. But you're absolutely right with the collusion. That's what, in a sense, poisons the well and gets everyone unable to really listen to the other side because, frankly, they don't trust them. I mean, you've done some amazing work on all this collusion, how it shakes out and the story behind the story. And I absolutely agree with you. With somebody like Jack Morris in a Yankee uniform, he would have been in the Hall of Fame years ago. Here's a big-time pitcher going to the biggest stage. He would have excelled. He would have been great. And then Dawson, Reigns, etc. And think of, these are kind of the top stars at that point in time. We're talking like early, mid-'80s. And so that means this becomes the stories that are told within the rank and file of the players, and this becomes kind of the clarion call of the union saying, hey, if they screwed these guys, they'll screw you. And so we better stick together and we better be strong. And it allowed, it's so peculiar because it allowed a group of really very rich individuals that were becoming richer. What's the old saying? It was billionaires versus millionaires. That's what the, labor strike of 94 was about. But it allowed a group, even though their salaries were going up and they were making a good amount of money, certainly compared to the generation of players before them, it allowed these stories, Morris, Raines, Dawson, etc., it allowed them to stick together. It allowed them to remain strong when everything continues to build up and build up. And I'm still amazed at times when you look at the ownership at that point in time. And I think the only exception, ironically, was perhaps the Blue Jays, which are, win in 92, they win in 93. Paul Beeston and Peter Richardson, and, there was maybe some others too, but they were about the only ones, from what I remember, within ownership saying, hang on, these guys aren't going to cave. We're doing horrendous damage to the game if we continue to, in a sense, step up and draw these type of lines in the sand and dare people to cross them. But as you say, Selig, Reinsdorf, others were controlling the agenda. And some of the meetings I went to, I still remember one. It was in Kohler, Wisconsin, Ian, and it was an ownership meeting, and it was pretty much at first, it was done there because they've got a great golf course, and a bunch of the owners wanted to play golf, and this was in the middle of the summer. But Paul Beeston, bless his heart, started to actually make some progress between, in a sense, the richer teams and the poorer teams, trying to figure out some kind of way that actually kind of became the payroll tax that we have today, the payroll fees that teams that pay a lot of money will, then have to pay to the, in a sense, to give back into the clubs, the lower ranking clubs. This was the very first vestiges of that. And I remember that it was so bizarre. The richer teams, we're talking, the New York teams, Boston, etc., were staying in this the resort was broken up into various buildings. And they were staying in like the biggest mansion building. They were staying in the big house, for lack of a better term. And the other teams, say, the ones that were struggling to get by, say San Diego, et cetera, they were staying, in a sense, down the sidewalk, down the drive, in buildings that weren't as good. And poor Paul Beeston was going back and forth between the rich and the poor teams, and pretty much everybody initially was just kind of going, he's knocking himself out. There's no agreement between rich and poor teams in baseball right now, especially in terms of what to offer the players and how to avoid some kind of work stoppage. But he started to make some progress. And Beeston made so much progress that they tried to stay another day at this resort in Kohler. And, but they didn't extend their rooms. And they all had to leave. And I still remember it's now about 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, and Kohler, Wisconsin is probably 90 minutes, maybe an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours north of Chicago O'Hare. And suddenly they've got to leave. They can't stay any longer. And ironically, they're making progress. They're actually coming up with a plan that maybe they can offer Don Fear and the Players Union. So they have to leave in the middle of the night. And it was like something out of the Day of the Locusts or something. They're just all, some are getting in the limos, others taking airport shuttles. The whole town is turned out to kind of watch this madness. There's TV cameras everywhere. And I'll tell you, who the guy who was the most irritated, the most put out by this, that had kind of fallen into this type of disarray, was Mr. George Bush, who was then president of the Texas Rangers. And you're just like going, wow. And he was in a snit. he was like a frat boy who couldn't get an extra night in the hotel. And he was just kind of, instead of throwing a hissy fit. And I know a lot of people within baseball like George Bush, but boy, that night it was an indication of kind of the mindset that most of the owners had. They didn't really want to put in the work. They felt put out that they had lost their rooms, and now they were put out because they had to take a 90-minute or 2-hour drive down to try to get a flight or get another hotel down in Chicago. And you're just going, this is dysfunctional. And then it certainly played out in the months ahead because, and that was, when I look back at those days, that was like I was one of the few people to cover that. I think it was me and Tom Fiducci, and we're just looking at each other going, this is nuts. And yet, this is the canary in the coal mine. This is a harbinger of where everything's going to go off the cliff in terms of labor relations between the players and the owners on the national pastime.
Now, let me just add on to what you said, because you bring on a very good point here. The owners still were arrogant. They still were bombastic, as they were back in the 70s. That line didn't change. It was more of a grudging effect, a grudge to hold that, hey, Messersmith and McNally, yeah, open free agency. Here we go. We got to abide by these rules. But Miller let them say, hey, look, yeah, we won, but I'm going to throw you a bone over here. They got to play at least 6 years, you know, and to do this, so you still got someone for 6 years. And they ate it. But now in the 80s, it's like, you know what? You had Lee McPhail. He wrote a essay to the American League, and they said, look, you guys are out of your minds. You're overbidding. What are you guys doing? You're going to outbid yourself and make these players even richer than you are. And Uberoff, whose legacy will always be collusion, had to leave the game in '89. He stamped it at the winter meetings, and he literally lit the torch to the Olympic cauldron, which said, look, go out and do what you need to do. Don't spend this money. And, you know, whether it was directly or indirectly, that's where it started. Now, Don Fair, you know, had to file the 3 briefs with his brother, Stephen, who was the chief lead counsel on that. But what happened was, and why the owners felt this way in the early 90s, is because both Bart Giamatti and Fay Vincent didn't slap the owners after the $280 million. First of all, Giamatti had died before. But look, in Marvin Miller's own words, I'm going to read it here for you, Giamatti had the gall to say that he saw no evidence of collusion amongst the players and that the entire matter was a non-issue. Now, those are powerful words, but let me tell you about Bart Giamatti. Okay, we all think of Bart Giamatti as this great, you know, this great leader, this man, you know, that banished Pete Rose and was totally against any kinds of foul play in baseball. That's how he's remembered. And he's also remembered for possibly bringing up a woman in the umpire ranks, which was Pam Postema, to the umpire ranks in Major League Baseball. But what people don't know about Giamatti is that, number one, he was for the owners. Number two, he had done an injustice personally regarding Rose because he could have been president of Yale University. And with Yale University, he was a Yale man, tried and true. And Smokey Joe Wood, okay? I'm just finished. It'll be published in June. He gambled, and he admitted he gambled to Lawrence Ritter in the unheard tapes that were never published, which I had my hands on, which was sent to me by the Notre Dame Library. And he gave Smokey Joe Wood a special award from Yale for being that baseball coach for many years. Wood had done not only something that Rose didn't do, which was throw games, but he rightfully admitted he took the fall for both Speaker and Cobb because they were still in baseball. The biggest scandal of 1926, 1927, Giamatti closed his eyes and did that for Smokey Joe Wood. But yet, when it came to Rose, he had an image to protect in baseball. and his work on collusion was to close his eyes to it, which just emboldened the owners. Now, Fay Vincent comes in. He's not an owner guy, but he said, look, I don't have to do anything. They were slapped with $280 million. It'll be like double jeopardy. And he even scolded the owner, said, you really made a mockery of yourself, but that's all they did. So by 93, the owners were emboldened by two different commissioners that both closed their eyes to this. And now to nominate Bud Selig as the interim commissioner when him and Reisendorf, both were at the top of the collusion list in the 1980s is, to me, just totally absurd.
Yeah, well, I think it's a great example, as you just laid out, of power unchecked. And as soon as maybe, I'm thinking now, Fay Vincent certainly took a pass early on, but when he starts kind of protesting, I don't know. In a sense, he starts telling the owners things they don't want to hear, especially when it comes to labor and the relationship with the players' union. They are so emboldened at that point, the owners are, they fire him. And away we go. And we end up with Bud Selig and, talk about somebody who's not necessarily going to, speak power or speak justice to power or whatever. He's not going to tell the owners what they don't want to hear. And away we go. And I think, the players aren't any fools. I mean, they're seeing this, as you point out, Uberoff, Giamatti, Vincent, and Vincent gets fired. I mean, look what's going on over there. They're loading up. They're loading up for a labor war. And it was very, I think, easy for Don Fehr to keep everybody in line or keep them on board, because all he had to do was point out, let me tell you what's going on over there, and they're coming for you. And it all kind of builds up. I mean, collusion, the reason for it, even going back, is there was this, and it still was very prevalent in the owners I spoke with in the early 90s, and certainly through the work stoppage in 94, was you spoke with them about this, and was almost, they wouldn't come out and say this, but this undercurrent that the players have too much. They got too much, certainly in terms of money and rights, and it's time we took some back. And just going, man, that's not how the marketplace is going to operate, and certainly not going to operate moving forward. But they were bound and determined to do it, and it wasn't, they were so bound and determined to do it, they were unable to really listen, not so much to reason, but to the reasons maybe not to pursue such a course. And as you just laid out there very well, it goes way back, and it's again like a hurricane coming. It's like a train roaring down the tracks. I remember in '93, we had a town meeting we started at Baseball Week. We started at 93 was the first one. We started to have town meetings at the All-Star game, and the first one, I believe, Andy Zimbalist, who's done some amazing books and studies about just sports and money. Don Fehr was a part of it. Ken Burns was part of it because his PBS series was due out, and some other, Bob Costas moderated it. But what stood out, what people walked away from that night, was in the midst of it, Don Fehr said, well, the best time, the moment we have the most power, in a sense, if it comes to this, and we're talking now about, two sides unable to reach an agreement, okay, the basic agreement's going to expire, what's going to happen? And he kind of blurted out, he probably shouldn't have said it, Ian, but Don Fehr said, our greatest leverage is with about a month left in the season. That's when we would go out. And you're just going, uh-oh, there it is. There's the gauntlet thrown down. We just saw a look at the Players Union playbook. And, of course, that's what happens. They go out, the following season, I believe it's, August 11th.
Well, August 12th, they started it. And you know what's interesting about Fehr? Fehr inherited the power from Marvin Miller. And what people don't understand is two things. Number one, Marvin Miller got into he was voted. He really wasn't voted in first. Judge Cannon was, who was pretty much a pro-owners guy, and then he didn't accept the job because he wanted to continue on with his judgeship. So the players, especially Jim Bunning, was instrumental in getting Marvin Miller. But when he came in, he even said, Miller, it was a third world organization. Mm-hmm. Here is a guy that was the chief negotiator for the Steelworkers Union and made it the most powerful in the 50s and 60s when labor was really starting to take things back, especially under the Taft-Hartley Act. And now you're going from collective bargaining, which, again, for people who don't understand is, look, you've got a team of people bargaining, not only on your side but another side. And he's going into an industry where the owners aren't willing to collectively bargain. They're treating the players like chattel. They're saying, look, you're getting paid too much already. What shocked me the most was which I knew already, the owners in the 40s and 50s, when labor was coming up, they would say to Yogi Berra, well, George Weiss would say, well, you didn't win the MVP this year. You won it 3 years in a row. You're already the highest paid on the Yankees, and we're going to give you a $2,000 raise if you're lucky, okay? Now, in comes Miller. He doesn't know what the minimum salary was because the owners never told anyone what each player made. They just said, oh, you're the highest. So when Curt Flood, they said, well, you're one of the highest players. He found out he was 8th on the list. He got freaking pissed off because no one knew. And Miller had to take, literally, the standard of living from 1945 to 1966, and he said, wow, players only got $1,000 pay raise when he added up since 22 years, and the standard of living has gone up by 78%. Now let's go to Don Fehr. Okay, let's go to Don Fehr now. In 1985, you had two troubles going on. And Miller was pissed off because he had retired in 82. He had settled his strike in 81. And he felt that the players of the day, except with a few people, holdovers from the 60s like, Nolan Ryan and those guys, he felt, Don Fehr, made a huge mistake, that the union got soft, that the whole Pittsburgh drug trials was an indication of the excess that the players were enjoying and dabbling in cocaine and stuff. And I think the owners saw that too. And Fehr let it play out, the trials. He did not prepare the participants well. He knew Fehr. Cocaine was becoming king. You could see it in Strawberry. You could see it in Gooden. You could see it on the Kansas City Royals. You could see it in Pittsburgh. And yet the union was powerless to see that the owners took advantage of it, saying, if they have enough money to blow on blow, we're going to do this. Now, by 93, it was a little different. Fehr had gone through the collusion cases. He reinvigorated the union to, again, with the help of Marvin Miller, who was a advisor at the time, and got it back saying, look, this collusion now, they're working against you. It just solidified the players. Now, 93, he took a page out of Miller's book saying, well, look, we're not going to do the same thing in 72 and strike before the season begins. We're going to cut into the revenue on the owners by striking like we did back in 81 to strike mid-season. And we're really going to give it in their pockets. And that's what Fehr did. We're going to do it at the end of the season. We're going to cause a misery. There's not going to be no World Series, and baseball's going to be screwed.
Right. And I think I've always been intrigued by that relationship between Marvin Miller and Don Fehr. As you just pointed out very, very well, Fehr brings them back together. This is a lean, mean fighting machine. They want to become, as a union by the time things blow up in 94. He learned from the master. And I've always found it intriguing, you don't want to wish anybody's demise on anyone. But Miller lived a good long life, and I think you and I both agree he should be in the Hall of Fame. I mean, nobody's had more impact, I think, on the national pastime than him. But if he had faded from the scene earlier, not been an advisor, certainly not been the one. I think Fear, in the discussions I had with him, sometimes was very much looking over his shoulder, almost kind of thinking through things. Okay, I got Miller watching my every move. I better do things, in a sense, by the Miller book. I better do it right. And if Miller hadn't been, say if he died or maybe, wasn't that involved anymore, had gone on to something else, I really kind of wonder what kind of leader Don Fear would have been of that union. I don't think he would have been as strong. I mean, Don Fear, in the interactions I had with him, was a very introspective, almost a shy guy. And being kind of the leader of a major union like this didn't really, in my mind, fit his personality. But I think one reason he got out there and was so front and center and a very effective leader for the Players Union was because Marvin Miller was, very much in the background. And Marvin Miller was on the other end of the phone, saying, "Hey, what did you just do there? You should do this." And it was almost a father-son relationship with some of the very kind of strangeness that can impact that relationship at any point. And yet, it was probably a good thing for the players that Miller was still around, because he was, he's almost, to make a joke about the season, the ghost of Christmas past, and you better not mess up because he's watching. And so therefore the union was strong, and as a result, Don Fear on down was very strong. I was always very taken by how that, it was about half a dozen of them, Fear and his lieutenants, they had their act down. And whereas you would go over, and again, I'm thinking back to Kohler, Wisconsin, but certainly other meetings of the owners, you just go, this is like the Keystone Cops. I mean, nobody's quite sure what the plan is here. Whereas you'd look back over the Players Union, yeah, they had a plan and they were sticking to it.
And a lot of people forget about Richard Moss, who is Marvin Miller's general counsel on his team when he first got into the Major League Baseball Players Association. He was instrumental being Miller's legal advisor, because many people mistaken Miller for being an attorney. He wasn't. He was an economist. And he grew up in my neck of the woods in Brooklyn, New York, and he rooted for the Dodgers. But it was Richard Moss who kept Miller updated on what's going on in the courts. What can we do regarding collective bargaining? He pretty much told Miller and discussed with Miller, look, we're not going to win in the courts. We're not going to win in Congress. There's no way we're going to get rid of this reserve clause. But we got to bargain for a neutral, independent arbitrator who will hear baseball, so baseball would not be reliant upon Congress and the courts, which has voted against us in 50 years since 1922's Federal League versus Major League Baseball, where basically Oliver Wendell Holmes, Justice, said, hey, look, you guys aren't interstate commerce. This isn't affecting antitrust laws. Antitrust laws don't do it. And it was challenged twice. Once with Gardella in the late 40s.
Denny Gardella, yeah.
And, of course, Toulson, who we sued the Yankees. He was a guy in the minor leagues. And I wrote about that case. And, by the time the Supreme Court got it with Earl Warren, they said, look, we're not going to touch this. This is for Congress to rule. They just blinked at it, and now you have flood going up. At the same time, the second collective bargaining agreement was happening, and Miller played the card against Bowie Kuhn. He did something off the record. He met Bowie in the middle of Manhattan on a chance encounter, and negotiations weren't going well. And he said, listen, Bowie, if there's no independent arbitrator and you don't remove yourself from the three-board panel, every issue that gets dropped on your lap will be yours. Whether you vote for the players or whether you vote for the owners, you're going to get blamed from either side depending upon who you vote for. And that's what broke it. A lot of people don't know. Arbitration with an independent arbitrator started in the 1970 year. but the fruits didn't get rewarded until Catfish Hunter years later. Now we take
exactly.
Now we go to 1993. It's a whole different ball game now because the owners have gotten a little smart. But I'll tell you what we're going to do. We'll talk about labor on another show because I could just talk to you all day about it. Like I said,
You know it, my man.
You know, let me tell you, I've been a lawyer for 23 years now, and tax and labor are my two big things. But I like to get to Toronto. I like to get to the Giants. And then we could have a whole show on labor. We'll have a 3-part series because I just love talking about it. Unfortunately, what's going on in Toronto? They just won the World Series.
Yeah, and they somehow retool and do it again in '93. I mean, we talked, on an earlier show about Pat Gillick, the then general manager of Toronto, who I still think is one of the smartest guys in baseball. What a legacy this guy has. And it was fun a couple of years ago to serve on the Hall of Fame committee with him. We were both members of that. But he had been so criticized because Toronto hadn't gotten to the World Series and let alone win it. And yet they do. They do in '92. And he very subtly makes the necessary adjustments to have them in position to win again. And the main guy he brings in is Paul Molitor. And Molitor was, it's funny, everything seems to be going back to labor stuff today. Molitor was a player team rep pretty high up in '94 during the work stoppage. And he was one of the guys I would call every Sunday afternoon. Baseball Weekly's deadline back then was like Monday, and I was usually doing a labor story. I was always doing a labor story. And Molitor would be one of these guys who would kind of very quickly but succinctly take me through where things stood. And it's like almost a weekly check-in call with Paul Molitor. And he's so smart, and we've seen, how he's led the Twins to new heights, just in this recent season. But Gillick was smart enough. Gillick had done his homework because here you had a guy in Molitor, surefire Hall of Famer, is going to go in a couple years later with Dennis Eckersley. I think still one of the most impressive classes. I kind of cried alligator tears when both of those guys went in because both of us were such great quotes and helped me out over the years just to understand the game and understand labor in Molitor's case. But Molitor hadn't won yet. He had come close with Milwaukee. I mean, he's a surefire Hall of Famer. And we've got now another one of these instances of a guy who's coming to the end of his career, and there's one thing left. It's the championship. There's enough individual things that he's done. And, it was just an incredible DH, et cetera. Gillick put Molitor in signing him, and he put him into the Blue Jays clubhouse. And as we've well seen, we've seen it time and again, the thing that most champions are trying to avoid coming off a championship is being not hungry enough. In a sense, not being ready to not only defend your title, but try to win it again. In a sense, we see it time and time again. Teams win, and all of a sudden there's a surprise the next season when they're the big game, the team everybody's shooting for. And the Blue Jays had won in '92 and, had a pretty incredible team, had a great nucleus, but Gillick was smart. He put Molitor in on that. And I remember talking with Joe Carter, actually some of the pitchers, even some of the coaches, and they said this was the best guy, in a sense, to join our team. And there was some other micromanaging, but this was major. Because here you got a surefire Hall of Famer, and from spring training on in '93, it was Molitor saying, hey, let's do a little bit more work. Hey, can we do a little bit more batting practice? He's the guy pushing this team and is making sure they're not too fat and cocky and sassy and resting on their laurels. And they come out and play a team that was really beloved, the Philadelphia Phillies, with Dykstra and Dalton and all these guys, kind of almost a throwback team, something you'd see out of the old, barnstorming days, the 30s and the 40s. I mean, this team loved to have fun. And it was a great World Series. And it pretty much comes down to Joe Carter, hitting the 3-run homer to win it. off Mitch Williams, off the Wild Thing. And so you had all these great characters, and some of those games are just phenomenal. I still remember the 15-14 game that the Blue Jays win. Pretty much they put them in good position to take the series at that point, and they were way down and then came back. And that was a deadline night for a lot of us. And I was sitting next to Tim Kirchin and Steve Russian for Sports Illustrated. And I believe, it was Steve. Steve had to do the game story. And that game went on into the night in Philly. And you thought at first, well, Philly's up. Uh-oh, their bullpen's blowing up. Here come the Blue Jays. And these are the type of moments that kind of keep you going a little bit. And Tim Kirchin was all over Steve Russian, pretty much saying, hey, you got to write this on deadline. This game's changing. What are you going to write? You're running out of time. And finally, Russian turns to us. Well, I get him on, and he turns to us. He says, "I'll show you what I'm going to write." And he drew a big X, on a pad of paper in front of him, and just put his forehead down on the X. He put it right down on the desk, and we just all crack up and go, "Oh, geez, poor guy," and he's going to have to turn around this story in about an hour, or a little over an hour. I read it, Ian, later that week. It was beautiful. It was a great story. And you're just going, wow. I don't know how that guy did that. But these are kind of the fun times you have along the road and something like that. And it was just a good time. Another thing that stood out, I've kind of alluded to the great management that the Blue Jays had, keeping Gillick as GM. Gillick believing he's got a great nucleus of a team. You just need to add some extra parts. Mulder, that's a hell of an extra part. Add Tim. But the games are going back and forth between Philly and Toronto. And back then, nobody likes to hear press guys kvetch, but here's one. The flights were few and far between. You either had to go down to Atlanta and change on Delta and go up to Toronto, or go through Chicago on United, from what I remember. And I remember I thought I had one of the few direct flights after that 15-14 game when we're going back to Toronto. And I believe it was on American. And I show up at the Philadelphia airport. I'm ready to take my quick direct flight, ready to get in Toronto, write my off-day story, etc. And I got bumped. I don't know what happened. I was no longer on this flight, and it was going to take forever and a day. It was going to take all day to get to Toronto. I was going to have to connect. And I'm getting kind of worked up, and I don't get that worked up, but I was tired and I was cranky, and I'm starting to, give the flight person a hard time. And suddenly I get a tap on the shoulder, and it's Peter Witterington, president of the Toronto Blue Jays. Peter Witterington was a self-made guy. He pretty much started as a salesman for Labatt's, and Labatt's at that point owned the Blue Jays. And we kind of knew each other. We didn't know each other super well. I knew Beeston better. But I tapped him on my shoulder, and he said, "You got bumped from this flight?" I went, "Yeah." And I'm pretty mad. And he said, "I got bumped too." And I'm thinking, oh, okay, well, that kind of stinks for both of us. And he goes, "I'll tell you what I'm going to do." And I said, "What are you doing?" And he goes, just a couple, little ways down the corridor, there's a flight leaving for Buffalo. Why don't you get on that flight? That's open. I just got on it. Get on that flight and we'll take my limo to Toronto from Buffalo. They're sending it for me now. And I was going, nice. So sometimes you know how the other half lives. And I got a chance, in a sense, to hang with a guy that, we're kind of back to labor again a little bit. If the Reinsdorfs and the Seelys and even John Harrington at that with the Red Sox of the world had listened more to the Peter Witterington, I doubt if we would have had a huge labor debacle as we had the following season. But here was a guy, self-made guy, but he was thinking outside the box. At that point, certainly had the money, and he allowed me to go along for the ride on the limo from Buffalo to Toronto. And that was, these kind of weird stories you remember decades later, but you get to see the personalities. You get to see, okay, what's the real character of the man? What's the real character of the individual? And here you got a guy who doesn't know me really from Adam. He knows my byline a little bit. I've interviewed him. But he's got, in a sense, the decency to go, wow, that guy got screwed too. I'm going to reach out to him. I'll give him a ride in my limo. And I got into Toronto in great shape.
Yeah, I remember you telling me the story on the last thing, and that's a very humbling thing that he did. Very humbling, because you wouldn't see George Steinbrenner doing that. Well, maybe you would have. I don't know. Marvin Miller said that. Yeah, Reinsdorf. I'm surprised Chicago won it that year with him. But you know what? I mean, look, he owned the Bulls too. I mean, 6 championships, you can't be wrong, right? I mean, but you know what? He was so anti-player. It reminds me of the Magnets going back into the 1950s.
But you know what? I just want to point out one thing that just occurred to me, Ian. We're talking Marvin Miller, talking Jerry Reinsdorf. 2 very successful guys, 2 very powerful guys, 2 guys who really had a particular take on the world and certainly changed the national pastime. Both of them grew up huge Brooklyn Dodger fans. I still remember sitting with Reinsdorf at one point, and he had all this memorabilia about the Dodgers, and he knew all the stories, and it was like getting in the Wayback Machine with Mr. Peabody. Suddenly we were back with Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier and all, this and that, and the shot were heard around the world, and you just kind of go, both these guys loved that team. That's the team they followed. Yet, certainly in Reinsdorf's case, but they just couldn't find a middle ground or a common ground, to save the sport from suffering when it mattered the most. And yet, here they are, both fans of this one team, and had told many of the same stories about it.
It's funny. When you talk about a guy like Jerry Reinsdorf and you talk about Marvin Miller, and yet they're both come from the same cloth. Basically, they're cut from the same cloth. It's really you're walking on the middle of a 2-sided coin, because you go back, O'Malley was one of the most powerful owners ever in the history of baseball. In fact, he quoted Gehring over there, the labor negotiator for the owners, and when Miller was saying, he wants a raise, the minimum wage, O'Malley turned to Gehring and said, "You go tell me that nice Jewish boy to go back to Brooklyn. I'm in L.A. now." And he really did not want the players to complain about money. He thought he took care of the players. He thought that what he said was the law. I mean, Branch Rickey defected from the Dodgers because of it, went to Pittsburgh. Jackie Robinson never got along with Walter O'Malley. He would just not get along with Walter O'Malley. And the thing is, Jerry Reinsdorf really did believe that, hey, I'm the king. This is my castle. You want to enter it? You have no rights. You are a piece of property I buy and I can sell. And it was so difficult for him to live in a world where somebody is going to challenge him that, if you ask me, I really do believe he was the architect of collusion. And Bud Selig, who was with Milwaukee since the time I was born in 1970, he convinced Selig to go his way because they were not competitive, both the White Sox and the Milwaukee Brewers in the early 1980s, and they did not believe that players should have a say or should have a decent salary to boot, and they are the ones, the 2 biggest culprits that started this whole collusion stuff.
I agree. I always thought Reinsdorf was kind of the power behind the throne.
Yeah, I got articles that he was, and I know what his mentality was, which is why it befuddles me that people who listen to my podcast and learn something new every day, they forget about collusion. There's not been one book ever written about collusion. The biggest, and you know, Tim, you laugh, but the thing is, collusion contributed to the '94 strike. Judge Sotomayor, who's on the Supreme Court right now, a huge Yankee fan, grew up in the Bronx, ruled against the owners. There has never been a better time since '94 that the players and owners got along together. But Bud Selig did, and I don't have time to talk about, Bud Selig made economic decisions that when you look at the P&I levels of what the owners do, when this whole Marvin Miller thing began to unfold, look, you know, the gate receipts were pretty much how the owners made money. Then it's TV endorsements, and then it's all these other endorsements. I'd say back then it was like 65 to 70% of their revenue. Now, only in expenses, listen to this, player salaries only account for 38%. 38%. With all the money that they make today, the A-Rods, the Stantons, all these guys, with all their big salaries, it's only 38% of the expenses that the owners allot, which means they got a lot more profit today, even with these big salaries that they're paying off. And Miller believes, he commented on A-Rod before he died. There was a final symposium he went to in New York University where they have the Marvin Miller wing of the law school over there, the George Mason Law School, and he said, look, it's justified. They're making money out there. Why shouldn't you, as players, share in that money? So if a player is going to get that kind of money, don't you think he's worth it in the times we live in? And you know who sided with me on this? Brett Boone. His brother Aaron just became manager of the Yankees. You know what's funny? I was speaking to Brett, and I said, Brett, I think you got to go. He's like, why? I said, your brother just became manager of the Yankees. He said, yeah. No, speaking of him, he's a great guy, Brett. He tells it like it is. But he was on the Players Union in '94 because his father was very, very instrumental, especially in the '70s and well into the '90 lockout. And he said, look, why shouldn't the player get paid that much? We deserve it. You know, if they're going to make money and they got guys, they're going to cry about their balance sheets forever. 38% is expenses. That's less than half % of their expenses.
That's pretty good.
You know, and Bud Selig did that. You know, he said, well, look, we're not going to be able to beat salaries down. We're not going to be doing this. Let's make other changes. We'll add an extra wild card. We'll have more of an expansion. We'll have more of a playoff game. We'll have more TV rights. We'll have more cable rights. Why should people in Los Angeles be blacked out of cable? Because you have to watch it on Major League Baseball's terms.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I hear it all the time from the West Coast. It's insane. But baseball has done this. Texas, another thing. Under Nolan Ryan, the Rangers excelled, but they took away free TV. They got one of the biggest cable deals ever. Mm-hmm. The Yankees, too. I don't get Yes Television up here in Massachusetts. I get NESN. They took it away from WPIX. Well, some of it came. So baseball monopolized, the media, and they monopolized the jerseys and everything else. But baseball makes more money than ever now. That's because of Bud Selig.
Yeah. Selig did it up.
With that, I'm going to have to end it. See, we're going to have to come back to '93 now because we never seem to get, through the years. It's just when you think an hour is going to be enough, I always tell my guests, it's not going to be enough. I'm telling you, because once you get started, and then I got the questions, forget about it. We're going to have to revisit '93 into '94. We'll talk some labor. We're going to have you on the show anyway in a few more weeks with the Olympics. We'll get you on the show probably in March. We'll get you on the show in April to introduce your new book, and of course we're going to have labor. So we're going to have you on a lot more times, Tim. Just hang the line. I just want to end the show. I hope you had a good time today.
Always a great time, man. Thank you.
It's like being a kid in a candy store talking about all this stuff. Well, anyway, hold the line. Folks, as you see, a lot of stuff you learned today, a lot of things you didn't know, a lot of things I don't know. Well, that's the good thing. I don't know everything. I just sit here and read all day. That's about it. But I hope you guys and girls enjoyed the show because it's very important to understand what was going on 25 years ago. And, yeah, I can't believe it's 25 years. If I can't believe it's 25 years, when you think about Tim who started Baseball Weekly, forgot. What was that baseball? What was that thing you had? It wasn't Baseball Weekly. It was what?
Oh, no, it was Baseball Weekly. Yeah.
Yeah, it was for the, it was for USA Today, right?
Yeah. I should have left it alone.
Yeah, that's when you used to open the page. But, the whole USA Today thing I got when it started in 82, I used to love it because what they did was they revolutionized newspapers of looking like a television set. No one ever did that before. And so when I picked it up, I'm like, wow, it's color TV right here. Well, who's going to buy the New York Times and I can read this? So that's what I basically did. Tim's a great guest, folks. Go out. Look for his new book. What's the book going to be called, Tim?
It is called Cancer Crossings, A Brother, His Doctors, and the Quest to Cure Childhood Leukemia.
All right. Get the book. Get his other books, Summer of 68. Get the 91 season. Get his book on the U.S. hockey team. I'm going to have him back. He's always a plethora of knowledge. Love having Tim on the show. Hope you enjoyed it, folks. Great to be back in the new year and in the immortal words of Edward R. Murrow. Good night, folks. Good luck. We'll see you next time.